حي على الفلاح.
The entry of Islam to Africa is one of the important events in its history. And what distinguished Muslims from other expatriates in the eyes of Africans was that Muslims were the bearers of a message based on the Prophet's saying, "There is no merit for an Arab over a non-Arab, but with piety and righteous deeds." Islam entered the region of the Sudan decisively in the 16th century CE. Today, approximately 70% of Sudan's 22 million people are Muslims, living in the northern two-thirds of Africa's largest country. A distinctive cultural pattern of African Islam, grounded in Maliki observance and traditions, is practiced in Sudan. Islam also came from Egypt to the north, especially after the fall of Christian kingdoms in Nubia in the 15th century. The spread of Islam southward along the Nile had been effectively blocked by these Christianized Nubian kingdoms, dating from 350 to 550. The first Muslim state in Sudan was the Funj Sultanate, established in Sinnar in 1504. Islam followed relatively quickly after the fall of the last Nubian Christian kingdom, but a distinctive Sudanese culture and character was retained, with the Nubians maintaining their language and distinctive culture to the present day. Islam spread southward along the Nile and westward into the Kordofan and Darfur. In Sinnar, the Funj, also known as the Black Sultanate, attracted holy men from the Hejaz and from Egypt who introduced Islamic theology and jurisprudence and established the first religious courts. Pilgrims traveling across the vast trans-Saharan pilgrimage routes to Makkah were another source of continuous contact and influence of West African Islam on regions to the east, including the Sudan. Due to its proximity to the Arabian Peninsula, Islam has been preset in Sudan since the days of the Rashidun. After the death of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, the Muslims, motivated by their new faith and exploiting the weakness of the Byzantines and Sasanians, overran half of the known world, building an empire from Spain to the Indus River. Byzantine Egypt was invaded in 639 and largely conquered by 641, when Alexandria fell. When Lower Egypt was pacified, the Muslims pushed south into Upper Egypt, where they met a new enemy, the Nubians. There had been cultural contact between Nubians and Arabs long before the rise of Islam. Islam spread to Sudan from the north after the Islamic conquest of Egypt under the government of Amr ibn al-As radiallahu anhu. Nubia had already been Christianized, also from Egypt, hence the old Nubian church followed Coptic Christianity. The Nubian Christian kingdoms of Nobatia, Makuria, and Alodia fell to the Islamic invasions in 650, 1312, and 1504 respectively. It wouldn't take long until Muslim merchants entered Sudan. According to some Islamic sources, they quickly established the ports of Aydab and Badi at the Red Sea coast, although they remained largely irrelevant until the 9th century. Merchants also entered Nubia, as attested by Arabic tombstones, which appear as early as the 9th century. The major Beja tribe of the Hadariba intermarried with some of newcomers, primarily of the Rabi'a tribe, and converted to Islam. Eastern Sudan was the first part of Sudan to become a part of Islam. Other Arab newcomers, most prominently Abdullah al-Umari, tried their luck as warriors and fought the Beja and even Makuria. Al-Umari managed to establish a small principality around Moghrat Island in the mid-9th century, but was eventually defeated. Other Arabs pushed even further south and reached the mysterious but wealthy kingdom of Alwa, which apparently had a more relaxed stance towards the Arab merchants. Soon, the Arabs settled inside Soba, the Alwan capital, and had an own district. The process of Islamization of Sudan was gradual and is thought to have lasted several centuries. During this period, the adherents of Islam, Christianity, and various indigenous beliefs were able to live in coexistence. Between the 8th and 9th centuries, Arab traders and travelers then African clerics began to spread the religion along the eastern coast of Africa and to the western and central Sudan, literally land of black people, stimulating the development of urban communities. Soon, the Berbers were Muslims, every bit as fervent as the Arabs. After rebelling successfully against Arab domination, the Berbers were subject to the caliphs of Damascus and Baghdad in name only, and went on to play crucial and self-sufficient roles in the history of Islam and trade in Africa. In the 11th century, Berber society had given birth to yet another stringent school of Islam, that of the Almoravids. Followers of a Berber named Ibn Yasin, these Almorabitun, hence Almoravid, or warriors of the frontier, were an essential part of the religious environment of North Africa. But theirs was not the only type of Islam to be found here. Multiple Muslim spiritualities then made their way to the western Sudan from North Africa and from Egypt. Berber merchants were often the chief bearers of the new religion, but others played important roles as well. Traders from Mali known as Dula or Wangarawa were Islamized relatively early and carried the message of the Prophet to the central and eastern reaches of the Niger. Wandering Berber, Arab, Egyptian, and Sudanic scholars and clerics, ulama, some of whom claimed to be sharifs or descendants of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, found their way south of the Sahara, where they might gather a few pupils or disciples around them, set up a more formal madrasa or school, or even come to be advisors and confidants of kings. The two great Muslim clerics of the late 15th century, Al-Maghili and As-Suyuti, were striking examples of the last phenomenon. How was Islam, with its differing spiritualities but essential unity of faith, received in the western Sudan? The role of Islam in the Sonic kingdom, Ghana, provides an instructive case. Al-Bakri's famous description of life at the royal court of Ghana in the 11th century contains some important clues about Islam's presence south of the Sahara almost 1,000 years ago. In addition to telling of the power of the king, built upon the active trade in gold and salt, which was the foundation of Ghana's economy, Al-Bakri relates how the city of Ghana itself was divided into two distinct parts a few miles distant from each other, one town for the Muslims and the other for the king and his non-Muslim subjects. The former was graced with many mosques, clerics, and scholars. One should not, however, assume that all Muslims there were necessarily foreigners, since some Sunnic individuals had probably come to accept the new faith even before their king did. The royal town, for its part, was not lacking a Muslim presence. In addition to numerous sites sacred to the traditional religion of Ghana, the pagan city possessed at least one mosque as a place of prayer for Muslims visiting the king's court. Such a dual town arrangement can be noted for other points of contact between Islam and traditional royal courts in the western Sudan. Compare, for example, the early history of the Songhai city of Gao. Al-Bakri's account clearly indicates that the king, though not himself a Muslim, surrounded himself with Muslim advisors and officials, among whom numbered the royal treasurer. The Muslims' expertise in writing and hence record keeping, and also perhaps the aura of prestige and exoticism gained by having foreign advisors, led the king to favor his Muslim courtiers over his non-Muslim ones. Significantly, the king's co-religionist subjects had to greet their sovereign with ritual gestures of prostration and extreme deference, while Muslims were exempt from such behavior, greeting the king only by clapping their hands instead. We see then a royal court where two religious traditions appeared to coexist, where the ruler, though clearly attracted to faith in Allah, knew that his own continued power depended on his ability to conciliate and reassure his subjects who had not yet embraced Islam. At the same time, the king of Ghana could benefit from the knowledge and skills of his Muslim counselors, who for their part were seemingly tolerant of their lord's continued ties to paganism, which remained widespread among the people as a whole, especially outside the towns. These Muslims knew well the importance of the trading networks, which were the source of Ghana's wealth, and knew also that religious animosity could easily upset the long-distance contacts and cooperation necessary for sustained and continuous trade between Ghana and the Berbers to the north. In conclusion, the presence of Islam in Sudan was a complex phenomenon. One might expect the fiery spirituality of the Almoravids to have overrun local religious culture in the region south of the Sahara, but this was not the case. Both a willingness to compromise and yet a frequent yearning to reform and purify characterized the behavior of Muslims in West Africa. Indeed, the mutual relationship between Sudanic culture and universal monotheistic faith in Allah probably enriched both traditions. Despite frequent tensions between the two, many people of the Sudan drank deeply from the well of Islamic beliefs and yearning, and the ties between Islam, trade, and governance of the realm became in time virtually unbreakable. By the 19th century, Islam was well established in the Sudan after 3 centuries of contact and infusion of religious and culture from West Africa, Egypt, and Arabia, widely described by historians as the century of Islamic revolution. The 19th century was also the era of greatest imperial adventure in the Sudan, beginning with the Turco-Egyptian invasion in 1821 and culminating in conquest by the British in 1898. These events shaped the nation of Sudan and its modern borders and prepared an important place for Islam in the governance of the country.